Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Nothing for Nothing Leaves Another podcast. I'm your host, Lewis, and today's topic, we're going to be relationships part 2. Let's talk about it. Welcome back, and here we go. Let's dive right into it. Relationships part 2. So, last episode first episode of relationships, we talked about the beginning phases of a relationship. So that's the dating, the courting, and the whole getting to know each other thing and all that good stuff. But now let's talk about, in this episode, what happens when you get past the initial phase, right? So now you guys have been dating and talking for a while. Now you're getting into that phase where you're starting to learn each other, right? Or at least you should be. You should be learning each other and understanding the person that you are in a relationship with. What your goals are, what you're looking for, and what you're looking to get out of a relationship. Most of the time when you get into a relationship, people usually have a track in mind of where that relationship is going to go. Like if you get into a relationship, most times you get into a relationship, you're looking to get into a relationship for the long haul. Some, not all. Depending on what phase you're in your life is what I would say, depending on what kind of relationship you're looking to get into. But as you start getting into that second part of the relationship, some questions come up and things and events come up. So a couple of questions that I always ponder on and think about when you hear people talking about relationships and how their things are going and whatever stuff like that is some of the crazy stuff that happens in relationships. So, and also some of the stuff might happen actually before a relationship, but more so once you get into a relationship and you start dealing with somebody and you come across somebody that what I like to classify as a stage 5 clinger. So what is a stage 5 clinger? Stage 5 clinger is that person that is legit obsessed with you in a way that is unhealthy. And unhealthy in the sense of they have to be around you 24/7. They want to be next to you 24/7. They want to do what you do. Whatever you like, they like. Whatever you're into, they're into. Like just completely obsessive. So I always ask people, I'm like, and you get it from both sides, from guys and girls. And they're like, man, this person is just on another level. They won't stop. So I always ask people, like, what do you do about that? Like, how do you handle that situation? Some people handle it a little bit different. Some will try to remove themselves as best way they can away from the situation and try to do it easily so they don't hurt the person. And then you have some where they just like screw it and they just go balls to the wall just to like crush that person's soul. And these are the situations where if you watch news and TV, like you see and hear it all the time, like if you watch Dateline 2020 or whatever, and you start noticing, if you pay attention to it, some of these situations where people like murder a partners because they were literally borderline stage 5 clingers. They were obsessed with the person on a level that was unhealthy. So then it makes you think when you start looking at relationships and you start asking, like, why would you stay in a relationship when you know the relationship is toxic? Toxic relationships. And most people don't know a relationship is toxic. Well, sometimes, but the majority of the time, people don't realize a relationship is toxic until after they get past the initial stage. Like I talked about in part 1, all the fun stuff, like you getting to know, like dating, courting, and all that kind of stuff. Now you get into this portion where you're like in the meat of a relationship where you 9 times out of 10 use about 6 months to a year in. Now you start seeing those cues. You start seeing those signs. And you're like, ugh, I don't know about this one. This one seemed a little sketch. This one seemed a little weird. So when you're looking at that, how does that break down? Do you stay in that relationship or do you vacate? I've had friends that have done the latter. And when I say done the latter, I've had some stay in relationships where they're with somebody like that. And then they're kicking themselves when they finally do get out the relationship. It's like, why did I stay in that relationship so long? And then you have some where they make an immediate exit and then they feel bad because they're like, man, I don't know if that person's going to be okay. So then that prompts the next question. Should you be concerned about that person once you decide to disconnect from them? Human nature would tell you we will always be concerned for your fellow man or fellow woman. But in situations like that, should you? It's a great question, right? Because you already know from the emotional standpoint, this person is deeply attached to you. So you know you need to give them that space or get your space. But in giving that space, are you able to close that door so that you can release from that person? Or are you keeping the door open? It's like when they talk about things from a spiritual standpoint, they talk about you having footholds, leaving footholds so that things from your past or things that were not of God can kind of just wiggle their way back in. Does that happen in relationships? I believe so. But what do you do about it? How do you address those situations? I know a topic I've asked friends of mine before was like, and this is for the mature folks, is sex is always a big thing in a relationship, right? Intimacy. I'll say the word intimacy. Intimacy is always a big thing in relationships. It causes a lot of issues in relationships, and it's something that some people hold a lot of weight for a relationship. Now, most people say, okay, if I'm in a relationship with somebody, you're looking at their personality, type of person they are, how well you get along, and all that kind of stuff. And that stuff is always great and it's very important. But for some people, yeah, that part is good, but they're like, okay, what is the intimacy like? How is our intimacy? Is our intimacy good? Is it a good level? Is it a good vibe? Is it not? So now let's take that and put that with the craziness of a relationship. Well, the extreme part of a relationship. Does good intimacy trump a bad relationship? It's a question, right? It makes people think. People are like, I don't know. And then you have some that's quick was like, yeah, it'll trump a bad relationship. So then that prompts the next question. Well, how long? Because if you're in a situation, and this is an extreme version, but if you're in a situation where the person is abusive, physically or verbally, but your intimacy is great, usually it's one of those situations where y'all have a fight, something, then y'all get intimate, and it's like, whew, man, that was great. But all the problems are still there. The problems don't go away. So now you're prolonging, in my opinion, a bad situation because you're only focused on one side of the relationship. So what about the rest of the relationship? The rest of the aspects of a relationship? They always say things can't be one-sided in life. Everything in life has to have a balance. Relationships will be the same way. You have to have a balance, right? So you have your balance of all the other stuff that goes part of a relationship, and then you have your intimacy part of your relationship. And let's call a spade a spade. 9 times out of 10 in especially today's world, with the hive mentality and all the plastic surgeries and all kinds of crazy stuff going on, right? You will see, if you look on, hell, you can Google search. That's like throwing a dart at a haystack of stuff, and you get stuff about it all the time. So people always ask, like, what is intimacy? You have folks that grew up in a situation where they're like, I'm not being intimate with somebody until I get married. And then you get the rough side or the wild side of the crowd that's like, what? Not till you get married? You're not going at all? Like, what if y'all get married and it's bad? You hear it all the time, right? But then, how about this question? People ask that question like, what are you going to do if it's bad? Well, if you've never done it before, how do you know if it's bad? You don't. All you know is based off of your experiences. So if you've never done it before and your partner if you've never been intimate before and your partner's never been intimate before, how will you both know if it's bad or not? You won't. You will think whatever that is in a sense. So now when you go back and you're looking at that, that's that category of it, right? So which one do people prefer? It's an amazing question when you sit there and think about it. It makes you think. Because if you are blind to something of not knowing what it is or what that experience is, and the first time you experience that is with a person, so that is your shared experience between the two people, that's all you know. So you don't know if it's bad. All you know is, for you, if it was good, hey, you like, this is what it is, this is great. So do the people from the outside that is chirping, Does that play an effect? And does that have an effect? And should it have an effect? To me personally, I don't think it should. Everybody's experience is their own experience. So if somebody's experiencing something, let it roll. But when you look at it from when you piece in the dark side of it, like I said, being in a very toxic relationship, should you stay just because you found somebody from an intimacy standpoint that gives you what you need? Now, from everything else standpoint, the relationship's terrible. You have poor communication, except when y'all being intimate. Y'all, the vibe and connection is not there. It's physically abusive. It's verbally abusive. So why stay in a bad relationship? Like when I asked a bunch of people this, and this asked people this stuff for years, and you talk to a bunch of different people, you'll be amazed how many people say they would stay in a bad relationship if the intimacy is good. So then it makes you think, like, what is important in society as far as relationship goes? Is it the connection with the person? Or is it the physical connection with the person? Today's world, with sex being as rampant as it is, well, let me rephrase that. With sexuality being as rampant as it is and being portrayed as much as it is, you can see why people will say, yeah, if a relationship's toxic, I'll stay anyway. Because, the intimacy portion is good. But then it's like, how do you function? How can you say you're in a relationship with somebody when y'all barely talk or communicate? How can you say in a relationship with somebody when the presence of the person completely disgusts you? But yet you're like, hey man, sex is good, bro. We good. How long does that last? Again, it's one of those things that depends on the person, right? So if that's the case, how do you work it out? Who knows? That's a question that individually you have to sit there and answer for yourself. Because when you get into that second part of a relationship and you start identifying things and seeing who that person is, it gives you that breakdown. Like, everybody says relationships should be 50-50. On a comment from one of my posts, from one of my podcasts, a person was like, shouldn't a relationship be 100-100? It's like, damn, that'd make you think. And when you look at that, you're like, yeah, it probably should. Each person should be given 100% of themselves to the other person, not a percentage, half of themselves. If you think about it, right? Because if you're giving half of something, that means you got a whole other section that you still keeping to yourself. So how does a relationship grow? How do you strengthen the bond of that relationship to grow into something? See, when you have a relationship that's toxic, it's just not a good situation for either person. Because a person that's toxic in a relationship, for whatever reason they're toxic, whether they're verbally abusive or whatever, or they can, I don't even say if they can be just a person, maybe it's a person that's controlling, that wants to control everything from a relationship standpoint. And you're just like, when do I get my peace? When do I get my say so? I'm in this too. Because like I said, everything has to have a balance. Relationships have to have a balance. Or at least they should be. Like if you're in a relationship and people like, and I said this on my other podcast too, it's like people in a relationship and they're like, oh man, they're so great. They don't fight. They don't do anything. You got a problem. You probably should tuck and run. Because nobody's perfect except for God. No two people are perfect. No group is perfect. So my answer to the question, does intimacy trump a bad relationship? I would say no. Now, some people say yes, but I would say no. Because you're staying in a situation where it's a detriment to you. You'll be in a relationship with somebody where you completely lose yourself. How do you function when you don't even know who you are? That's not a headspace you want to be in. That's not a place you want to be in. You're in a relationship. Y'all should be able to conversate openly, which we all know that doesn't happen in any relationship. Some it does, but for the most part, a lot of relationships it doesn't. Because there's feelings involved. A relationship is all about emotions and feelings, connections and intricacies and all that stuff. But you have to be able to sit down and have a conversation when you're in a relationship. But how do you have a conversation? How do you have difficult conversations in a relationship? See, when you hit that 6 months to a year window, these are the things that should be discussed, or these are the things that should be kind of floating in the atmosphere to be talked about. Because your end goal, usually in a relationship, is to find a person to stay with permanently, or until one of you guys get called home. And when I say get called home, that means, you're no longer here on this earth. You're with the big man upstairs. But think about that. That's what you should be shooting for in a relationship. But now the next question is, when you're shooting for that in a relationship, how do you put your emotions to the side to have an open conversation with somebody? Because say you got somebody that's a stage 5 clinger. How do you sit down with that person to have a conversation with them about the things that they're doing that by expressing it to them it's going to hurt them? Or it might not be intentionally made to hurt them, but it's going to be interpreted that way. The interpretation of what is spoken. Like, all right, okay, get it. What about somebody that's toxic? Or a toxic relationship? If it's an abusive relationship, you just need to tuck them and get the heck up out of there. There ain't no having a conversation with that person. And let me rephrase that. At that time, there may not be no having a conversation with that person. Now, maybe later down the road, things have been separated for a good while, and y'all can come back and have a conversation, and maybe that happens. But for the most part, just nix that and keep it moving. But it's amazing how, in the society we live in now, like when I did a podcast talking about high mentality, everybody is so fixated on what somebody else is doing. It happens with relationships. You can be in a relationship, but your focus is what's going on with your friend's relationship. Because from the outside, if you're not that known with the person, from the outside looking in, you think their relationship is the greatest thing in the world. And you're like, we need to be like them. No, how about you be like yourself? Be an individual. Be two individuals that go from being an individual by yourself to becoming one. That's what you should be shooting for. That's what the goal should be for a relationship. If you notice in something that's toxic, or there are things that person's doing that you don't agree with or don't vibe with, one, have a conversation about it. Or two, if you realize that there's no point in having a conversation or resolving the issue, then you just close. You 86 it. You just close it. Be done with it. That's your best bet. But if you're looking long term, made it through the first 6 months, things is going good, you're rocking and rolling. Now you should be able to start having those conversations. And everybody's different. Everybody's relationship is different. Hell, people can go on freaking 20 dates and still not officially be labeled an item or a couple, which is freaking weird. But it happens. It happens in the world. But think about that. Like that one question, intimacy. How much does intimacy play a role for you in a relationship? Hell, I talked about it on the first part of the relationship, of the podcast on relationships, where I was like, depending on what stage a person is in their life, especially from a guy standpoint, I mean, it's probably for some females too, but from a guy standpoint, dude is like, yo, I am trying to get in your pants. Soul mission. That's the only mission they got. But you would think as you get older and you're transitioning your life to something more stable and more functioning, that you would look at Okay, how much does that play a role? Intimacy. How much does it play a role? Can you be without it? If God came to you today and would say, hey, look, I need you to go celibate for 60 days, could you do it? For all my folks out there that's key on intimacy, could you do it? People will wonder. I don't know, man. It's a long time. It's a long time, but if the end goal is something great, is it not worth it? If your sole focus is to find your forever person, if that was the mandate, is it worth it? See, these are the things which is I like talking about them because they make people think. It makes people take a pause and stop and look at themselves and look at how they were in past relationships, how they deal with their current relationships. That's all I'm here for, is to make you think. I can give my opinion on it, but even with that, it still makes you think. You still have to take that time and be like, I wonder, what do I want? That's one of the biggest things that I remember when my buddies used to talk about all the time. And they'd be talking about girls and this and that. And I'm like, well, what do you want? People like, a lot of counts. People was like, I don't even know. I'm pretty sure some ladies go through it too. Ladies will be single or in a relationship, be in a current relationship and find issues with a lot of stuff. And it's like, okay, you're having an issue with this, you have an issue with this. What do you want? If you can't sit down and ask yourself that question and answer it, you got a whole nother issue. You got a whole nother thing of issues going on that you need to address. Because if we're calling it 100, relationships are all effort. All effort. For my ladies listening, how many times have you sat there and talked to a girlfriend and they were completely upset because it was like the guy didn't do this or he didn't do that? Or for my fellas out there, how many times have you been talking to a homeboy or a homie and he's like, man, I'm sick of this. She ain't doing this, she ain't doing that. And the first thing I always ask my male buddies when they come to me with stuff like that, I'm like, well, what did you do? Are you putting in effort? And then Kansas is like, Because if your sole focus is getting in her pants, you'll put max effort into that, right? You'll play all the games you need to play, talk all the sweet talk you need to talk. Once you get it, then what? Because all that stuff you said leading up to that, that's what she's thinking about. She's thinking about you putting in that kind of effort for the things that you said you were going to do. That's how it breaks down. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to, when you look at relationships, I think it boils down to, what do you want? What are you seeking? And what are you willing to accept? What are you willing to let go? Relationships are about compromise when it boils down to it. Somebody has to give a little, somebody got to take a little. So then I guess the next question people should be asking themselves is, how much are you taking? How much are you giving? What are the effects of giving too much? What are the effects of giving too little? Fascinating relationships. If you're a guy that's seen by several women as being crazy attractive, how do you deal with that? What do you want? Do you want that constant attention? Or if it's a lady, and people see her and they're like, oh man, she's the most beautiful person in the world. She's so beautiful. But what does she want? Does she want to be called beautiful? Does she not want to be called beautiful? Does he want to be called handsome? Does he not want to be called handsome? What's the breakdown? See, I'm no relationship expert. Far from it. Trust me. But when you have when you listen to this podcast and then you have conversation with your friends, just listen to the stuff that they say. These are the kind of questions that people are dealing with internally while they're in a relationship that they don't speak of. And people are like, why ain't nobody know about X, Y, and Z? One, you didn't ask. And two, like I said, everybody's mindset is different. Everybody's breakdown is different. Everybody's looking for something, seeking something different. So, as you listen to this for part 2, I guess you could say relationships part 2 was mainly about, what do you want? What do you want? Because if you can say that I want this, 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 and this. Okay, cool. What are you doing to get it? Or, like I was talking to a guy, and it was about how some ladies nowadays are like, I want a man that's got this, 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 and this. A fan, all this other craziness to take them somewhere. Or just to do stuff with them or whatever. And it's like, damn, all of that. What makes it the standard for a person to say, I want this, 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 and this? It's in my podcast. Nothing for nothing leaves nothing. You have an expectation from someone in a relationship, but you're not giving anything to it to get the things back that you want. So you sit there and it's like, what you gonna do? There you go. What are you gonna do? So I say in closing to relationships part 2, because there will be a part 3 and probably part 4, is 1, how important is intimacy in a relationship? 2, what do you want from the relationship? What do you want? So many people walk around blind, even in life, not knowing what they want. So how can you pour into something if you got nothing to pour? Or how can you pour into something if you don't know what you want to get out of what you're pouring? It makes you think. So I will close off this chapter of relationships with find out what you want, find out what's important, and find out what you need to do to get to whatever it is that you want. Make sure you guys like, listen, and subscribe. Respond. Give some feedback to those questions. Sit down with your buddies or with your ladies and ask these questions when they're talking about a relationship and what's going on with it. Ask them. You'll be amazed at the answers you hear. And you'll be more amazed to know that sometimes people have the same mindset and not even know that they got the same mindset. Y'all have a good one. I'll catch you on the next go around.